Hello, everybody. This is Brian Smith with 321 Gang, and you're here with us again in our regularly scheduled podcast, Change the Conversation. We are so thrilled to have our very own Cindy Van Epps here with us today. Hi, Cindy.
Hello. How's everyone?
Well, hopefully everyone's doing quite well and interested in learning a little bit more about scaling agility in large government-type programs. So, Cindy, tell us a little bit about yourself and, tell us a little bit about yourself.
So thank you very much. Well, my first job out of college was working on space shuttle flight design, right?
Wow.
So that tells you I have a whole lot of experience, but the experience was on a large scale government classified because we flew DoD missions, system engineering kind of environment with space shuttle. And I have since in my kind of long career had the opportunity to work with a lot of people in different kinds of environments, including commercial software delivery, which is quite different, and many engineering kinds of environments. So I'm excited about this talk about what's different about, highly skilled engineering type environments and how we can bring Agile and scaled Agile to help bring success there.
So, when we talk about systems engineering, just to be clear, we're talking about the proliferation of software being a part of this system, right? I'm sure back in the 80s in the space shuttle program, there was software for sure, but not to the level there is today, or neither the speed of its being built, tested, delivered, those sorts of things, right?
Yeah, it's crazy because, when I went to college, there were many universities that didn't even have a computer science department. The electrical engineers were teaching the computer science classes, and so there's been a significant change. And many of the customers that I've worked with, like the case study we'll discuss today, they're using a 30-year-old process that was created to support the hardware engineering side of the world.
Sure.
And software has, and our evolution of how we deliver software has changed so significantly that that's part of the challenge is how do we mesh the hardware side of the world and the software side of the world with these, large embedded systems.
Right. Yeah, lots of unique challenges in that world when it comes to how to do a better job of delivering software. There's, contracts, and we'll get into that. So I think when we talk about agility in these government programs, it seems like we've hit a bit of a tipping point because we've been doing that. We, meaning 321 Gang, you and I, have been doing this for a number of years now, and we've slowly seen the market being large government contractors, military, aerospace, and defense, start to see that this is important. This is for our service people in the field and on the ground, delivering features and value to them quickly is a competitive advantage. And there's a couple of things that have come out recently that really indicate to me, and I think you as well, that we've hit a tipping point, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. Not the least of which is that the military leaders are realizing that you can't control the pace at which their threats are increasing. Right. So they find that they have to be very responsive. So
there was that one quote, right? There was one quote by Lieutenant General Perkins.
Yes.
And he said in my notes, if you can't adapt to the world quickly, you become quickly outmaneuvered. And I think he's with the Army.
Yes, absolutely. So when we see these born on the web companies who have this time to market and, the strong competition, and so being outmaneuvered by their competitors is something that they live and breathe every day.
Sure.
So in the military, we don't think about competitors. We think about the threats.
Adversaries.
Yeah,
right?
The adversary.
And somewhere I read that you wrote, it's binary, right? It's The outcomes are binary.
So it's funny because, we take some of the traditional things we talk about, and the people I work with say, you don't delight an F-18 fighter pilot, right?
Right.
You, one, make him safe, and two, make him badass, if I can use this podcast. But, that's really what you're after. And so it's a different perspective. And, it's funny, too, when you talk about people who are just working in county or city governments and you say, what's your definition of success? And they say, well, we have to keep our leaders out of the news, right? We just have to keep our government operations working properly so that, there's
no bad press.
No bad press, exactly.
Right. Well, the other thing that we've come across recently is this. The leader, and I'm forgetting her name. I don't know if you recall it, but the Pentagon recently reported that they had funded a study to see what they ought to do to increase their competitiveness in this adversarial world, right? So that we're not outmaneuvered. And the title of the article that's in the publication Inside Defense is Defense Science Board urges DoD to shift to Agile immediately, and quotes added for effect, but that is part of the title of the article, and to me, that's huge. That's the Pentagon itself urging contractors to adopt Agile. So, can you tell us a little bit about what you know there?
Yeah, so it's a great article, and it just came out in March of this year, so it's very timely. Exactly. But one of my favorite parts of what you just quoted is it also says, and jettison their traditional ways of working. So if you look at the standards like DO 178B or the NavAir processes, they say, it can be serial or agile or incremental, but they don't give you any guidance, right? And the contracts are written in a waterfall method. The deliverables, the seed-rolls that they have to deliver and the milestones that they have to present to are all geared toward a waterfall-based method. And if you want to use Agile methods, scaled Agile, it feels very risky and adventuresome for a contractor. And while they don't have competitors in the same sense as a commercial software business, for instance, they do have to recompete for their contracts on a regular basis.
So often, sure.
Yeah.
Well, but let's talk about that a little bit more, and it may come up in the case study we get into, but contracting is a huge barrier to adoption. It seems, as you said, it seems risky, even though for those of us who have been doing Agile for a while, we know that done well, it can quickly take risk out and improve quality and deliver value more timely. But it feels risky, right? They're measured on these seed rolls. They're measured on delivering a chunk, earned value, and delivering chunks of stuff based against the requirements doc. So what guidance do you have for people, for organizations to make that feel less risky?
So I have a little anecdote from that case study that we're going to talk about. When we first met with them to do an Agile assessment workshop, there were about 30 people in the room, two of whom were from the government side, from the government contracting side.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, and everybody said, oh, we can't do Agile because of our contracts, because of our contracts, because of our contracts. And the guy from the government contracting office stood up and said, wait a minute. You need to understand why the contracts are written this way.
Isn't it to reduce risk for them, perceived risk for them?
It's a matter of trust, right? These were his exact words. It's a matter of trust. He said, we can't give you money for a 2-year program and then just cross our fingers and hope that you're going to come out with something on the other side. And so this idea of tell me all the requirements, and then we'll baseline it, tell me all the design, let's have all these full traceability matrices. He said, it's really a matter of trust. He said, and if you think about it, what better way to build trust than to show a working portion of the system incrementally. And he said, I can show you how to write a contract that supports an Agile methodology. And then what we also learned from this case study is as soon as you show the customer, and in this particular environment, it was every 4 years. Every 4 years they deliver a new version of the system.
So this is traditionally.
The magnitude. Yes, before we started Agile. And so, the customer now, as soon as we implemented Scaled Agile on this program, 10 weeks into it, they saw their first vision of the system. And they were visibly excited and said, how can we help you more? How can we be more involved? And so that collaboration started happening immediately. And so people tell us, as soon as you show the customer something, they will figure out how to work out the contracting side because they know it's a better way.
So a couple things come to mind for me with what you just said. One is this is a 30-year program that's ongoing. So they have a long relationship with their government contractor, and so having them, being able to invite them into the room and talk about this is a huge step, and maybe one that a lot of programs may not even feel like they could do or can do, but it seems like for these guys it was key.
Absolutely, it was. And this is the same thing when I talk to another contractor, government contractor. I ask them, so what is, why would you even have strategic themes at the enterprise level, right? Because you're getting these contracts. And they said, well, one of our strategic themes is that we want to be seen as the expert, the one who can deliver, the one who can help them innovate. And so it's this integral collaborative relationship that breaks down that silo between the contractor on the government side and the people delivering the system. And so that's part of Agile, is helping build that collaboration.
So I'm sure there are tons of scenarios around this, but it seems to me that have some level of trust between your contractor and government procurement office or agency is really important. And maybe if you've already got a relationship with them over some number of years, then that's an easier way to go. But let's move on. Go ahead.
I just mentioned in that context, what's important to remember is I always ask them, do people change on the government side? Think about it. The average enlistment time for someone in the Army is what?
4 years, 6 years.
4 years. Yeah. And people are constantly moving in their positions. So it's not like you have the long-lived relationship with your sponsor on the government side too. So your ability to keep that knowledge about the system is so critical.
You may even be able to flip that around and say, well, since those procurement officers are changing every so often, you want to be able to deliver value in smaller chunks so that when they go, the next person can come, you collaborate with them for the next value delivery, and it's in a shorter context. So I hadn't really thought about it in that way.
So the small batch size is about educating the next person that comes in as your sponsor too.
Right. So let's jump into the case study a little bit.
Okay.
I mean, we've sort of covered that we're at a tipping point. Even the Pentagon is urging government contractors to adopt Agile immediately. You've got a particular program that you've been working with, and let's talk about that. You talk about dancing with gorillas and welcome to the jungle and using this sort of theme. So tell us a little bit about why you've used that as a metaphor for helping these kinds of programs.
Yeah, so originally I wanted it to be a catchy title, right? And I called
you got your PR hat on.
Right. The gorillas are doing ballet. And but the gorillas don't represent people, they represent these systems. And there are two kinds of systems. There's the system that you deliver, which is a big, hairy system, a military defense system.
Right.
And then there's the system that builds the system. And this is one of the things I love about Scaled Agile is such an emphasis on this system, the people, processes, and tools that build the system. So if you think about these military processes that have grown up over 30 years, right? And the acronyms alone for that particular customer, there were 50 acronyms just on the one sheet that showed the summary of the process, right? And so the system that builds the system is also a big hairy beast that needs
could even be bigger than what they create. I would say in some cases.
Yeah, yes, I'm sure they compete with each other. Certainly. But also the jungle. Let's think about the metaphor of the jungle. It's overgrown and it's dangerous, right? Building.
What do you mean by dangerous?
Well, a system that could kill many thousands, millions of people at one time, or would put our own people at risk. Anytime you have a system, and you and I talked earlier about sometimes it's just binary, alive, dead, right?
Alive or dead.
Is the result of the use of this system, and it's not an over dramatization. They take these systems very seriously, which
as they should.
Yes, exactly. Right. So how do you, like the metaphor of the gorillas and the gorillas dancing is how do you get these big hairy beasts kind of working together in a synchronous way that is harmonious so that you can actually achieve the goal? You still got gorillas. They're still big, strong beasts, which you need them to be, but you need it to be in control and almost choreographed with harmony.
And that starts so let's focus on the system, the infrastructure system, right? The people, tools, processes, and contracts. So we spent a lot of time on the contract. So I would add contracts to that.
Yes.
Would you? Yeah.
Absolutely, and because it's such a constraining part of their environment. Yes.
Sure. And I think a lot of people listening, watching would say, well, we have this contract and we can go and try and change it, but that might be many months or years. I'm not sure. Do you find that programs, and maybe this is one of them at first, they have to sort of, they have to keep two sets of books. They have their Agile metrics here that they're doing, but then they still have to report back to the government with procedurals and other earned value and those things.
So two sets of books sounds like you're hiding something, and they're not, but they do have to make it. Yes. In this particular case study, the one that I'm most intimate with, they have a contract that's written, in the waterfall with the procedurals and the milestones and the funding. Right? The funding doesn't come in as one huge chunk. It's allocated out to change packages, for instance. And so on the Agile side, yes, how are we going to map that funding model up here down to teams that are working in teams of teams that are collaborating, right. Across the program. Another program I work with, they say, well, we think it is a strategic advantage to us to build some reusable components. Well, how are you going to reuse components across different programs that you support when your funding comes in and very strictly says you cannot use this money to do anything but this program?
And these companies struggle to find overhead budget to do these, reusable asset kinds of projects, right?
Exactly. Or refactoring code so that it's more maintainable. These enabler kinds of things that are first-class citizens in Agile and Scaled Agile. So there's a couple of ways that people work it, but this one case study in particular, their contractor is savvy enough to say, yes, we're going to give you a bucket of money for implementing continuous integration and for, automated unit testing and those kinds of things that help improve the infrastructure system, to use your word.
Right. Well, so earlier you said that on this particular program where it started with you anyway, or maybe I'm not exactly sure where it was, but there was this group of 30 people, including two contract people in the room, and it sounded to me that's how they started down an agile path with sort of the blessing of the contractors and this and that, and that sounds like a good place to start. But it's, I guess where I'm going with this long-winded question is how to give us some suggestions for how people do get started. Is that a best practice for getting started? Are there soft skills that people need? Are there training that people usually go to? So
yeah, I'm glad that you asked that. So first of all, you need to understand the timeline of that project. That Agile assessment workshop came 4 years after the program manager said, I looked back and I saw our first email that discussed Agile training was in 2013.
Wow.
That Agile assessment workshop happened in 2017, right? So
wow.
Yes, things don't move quickly. So it takes a lot of inertia and executive sponsorship. In that particular case, there was an executive who had worked in another part of their kind of a larger company who had seen Agile transformations very successfully in a commercial software kind of side of the house. And so he was the champion for bringing it to this program. And so we see that very often, that it's the leadership that needs to champion this in order to overcome this huge inertia, the huge beast that they have going. So the first thing is to find those champions, and the leadership really has to lead the change. Now, we see some organizations where it's a grounds
more
up,
of a ground up, grassroots kind of thing.
Grassroots,
I see
but
that.
that's
I saw that
as
years
effective.
ago.
Yeah,
I saw that years ago for Agile teams, just
Yeah.
a team, a couple of teams, or something like that. But when we're talking about large programs and transformational stuff, you cannot do it without funding, without sponsorship. It's just bound to fail, right?
I've seen it done in another large government contract organization, but what a struggle. I mean, if we boil things back down to economics, right, the amount of effort and personal passion that was required for that grounds up movement, that energy and passion and getting to where they needed to be and the value they saw, it could have cost the whole company much less
right.
to have the sponsorship.
And in those environments, those people often aren't rewarded for that kind of passion, for that kind of sticking your neck out, that kind of risk, right? It's a very risk-averse environment in some ways.
Oh, very risk-averse, absolutely.
And the other thing that it reminds me of is in some training I took at Scaled Agile some years ago, one of the things that really stuck with me was we were in a room of leaders, and Dean Leffingwell himself said, listen, the system can only change if you change it, right? It's the system because you are in charge, and you are in charge of it. So, so the system can only change, right?
It's a quote from Deming too, right? Because if you think about who can change the system, and there's some other quotes that I love. One is that people are doing the best they can. You hire great people, right?
They're not lazy.
No, they have to live within the constraints of the system that has been built there, right? Another quote I love is from Dontar Oosterwald, who wrote The Lean Machine about Harley Davidson, right?
All right.
And if I can paraphrase, he says, in an ordinary organization, people have to be firefighters just to get some ordinary changes. So people have to work exceptionally hard just to make ordinary changes on a regular basis. But in an exceptional organization, ordinary people make exceptional progress every day.
Yeah, that's cool. I like that.
So to get that extraordinary organization, it has to come from leadership.
So then if we've set some parameters for how people get started and some of the key ingredients for getting started, let's say then we get started and we've got our first program increment, right? And in Agile speak, or at least in scaled Agile speak, that's a period of time where you're trying to deliver a piece of value, right?
Yes.
And so you've launched your first program increment, and like any change is hard, and often things may even slow down significantly the first time around. So what kind of advice or what kind of observations have you made when people dig in, and then what happens after that?
Yeah, so a key thing, very, very key, is that people, sometimes want a very prescriptive process, right? I started in waterfall, then we did evolutionary spiral and rational unified process, and
Right.
and the Agilists kind of came out of that world and said, enough already. Don't give me all the do this, do this, do this, do this. Let's just distill it down to some basic principles. Exactly. So the key thing is for people to learn and understand the principles. Why is it important to have small batch sizes, short queue lengths? What are the economics of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the hardest thing in this traditionally command and control environment is this idea of relentless improvement. Now,
Really?
my team and I can decide how we want to adjust this small practice
Mm-hmm.
to optimize how we work to achieve the goals. My program can discuss and agree amongst ourselves how we can best deliver this value incrementally, right? And so you can see the conflict there of...
That's the same idea, Cindy, right, that Lieutenant General Perkins said in his mission command, right, is we need to get away from command and control and give the guys on the ground and gals on the ground
commanders intent.
Parameters, right? The intent, and then let them execute the mission. And so it sounds like that's a similar thing to what you're getting at here with the engineering programs.
And that's exactly the reason why it has to come from leadership too. Decentralized decision making, for instance. And the Marines have done it for many years. If you read Don Reinertson's book on the principles of product development flow, the last chapter is about how the Marines have a doctrine, and that it's for their people on the ground to understand the why is much more critical than understanding the what.
The how. Or the what, yeah.
Or the how. And they have the freedom to decide in real time what they need to do or adjust to meet the goal or the why of the mission.
Right. So this gets into some soft skills, right? This is you've got HR that may have to change how people are compensated or measured. You've got leadership that's used to command and control, and you're asking them to step back and behave differently. I mean, so this is more than just a change the tools, change the process. This is a organizational, a social change?
It's a huge social change. If I could correct a little bit of what you said they would step back, but they don't step back. They become servant leaders. They have to convey the vision and of the mission, right? And determine how they can help enable the leaders at all levels. Right. And so if you think about people, and I see this exactly in these companies, you have people who are super smart, have grown up all their lives being rewarded for being the really smart guy or girl, and worked in isolation, right? So Brian is great. He's smart. He's making A+. Let's leave him alone and let him do it, right? So they haven't had to work on teams. They haven't had to rely on other
collaborate.
People. Right. And so what's an interesting shift is there's all this undercurrent of energy around people with rational thought who say, oh my God, why do I have to make that trace matrix and do it all by hand? It doesn't make sense
Right.
to me, and it's just,
Hmm.
it's maddening, and I'm not
Change is hard.
motivated to do it. I'm not motivated. And that's where the energy flow is in the
Hmm.
traditional processes.
Right.
Now the energy flow switches to, hey, Brian and Chris, how can we improve the way that we do this? Let's look at how many defects we had last time. Let's collaborate together, put our heads together, and
Hmm.
figure out a better way. So it's an
Hmm.
energy shift from the
Right.
undercurrent of this is oppressive and I'm unmotivated to, hey, we can work together to change
Hmm.
it. So we have to think about it in terms of an energy
Right.
shift, but it requires a social collaboration, which is sometimes
Sure.
a hard change.
Really hard. Really hard. That reminds me of there's a there's a an exercise that's done with pennies that talks about, you mentioned flow, and
Yes,
how small batch
small batch
sizes can
sizes.
increase flow
Hmm.
significantly. And I think if we can find it, we'll put a link down to the bottom to that, because there might be some people who are like, well, what do you mean by flow? What is this flow thing? And I think that's a great, very simple way to demonstrate flow.
Yeah,
um,
if I could add to that, Brian, real quick, one thing that we don't, that people don't realize, they don't really quantify or think about, is the learning that comes from that batch size. So if you read Don Reinertson's work or Dontar Oosterwald's work, the key thing is what you learn from that small batch size is something that can be applied to the
Very
rest
quickly.
of your implementation.
Right,
And
right.
so it
That's
reduces the
huge.
cost of the work going forward. It is huge. Absolutely.
It reduces the cost going forward in a lot of ways, right? I would say in these programs, one of the things that most people recognize is that there is a ton of waste. And so
Mm-hmm.
I think what comes out is a lot of waste reduction, because you can make decisions and learn in real time and apply it very quickly. So
Absolutely.
that's cool. So let's see. I'm looking at my notes here. We talked about how you start. We started down the road of your first PI, and I would assume then, in the vein of what we just talked about, you take that learning from your first PI, and I think in your case study, they called it a survival PI, program instrument,
Yes.
and they
Uh-huh.
survived it. And
Yes.
then they took that learning and went to the next increment, the next PI2, PI3, and onwards. And then something changed, right? Their mindset changed from we can't do this to we can't do it any other way, or something. Was it really that dramatic?
It really was, and it's hard. It's easy to get bogged down in, okay, these are all the ceremonies, these are all the things we need to do, blah blah blah. And so if they set their goal for the first program increment, let's just get through it.
Yeah.
Let's
I
just
think that's
do it,
fair. I think
right?
that's smart, actually,
Right.
right? Because it's a big change. Change is
Right. Right.
hard.
And then the second, and see what we learned from it,
Hmm.
and we there's a pressure valve called, then we're going to evaluate and see if it's worth continuing or
Right.
adjusting. And so then they said, and as a secondary goal, part of this is we're just going to show this to the customer and just get some reaction, right? It's just all about
Right.
learning. And the
That's big.
reaction from the customer was so dramatic that was a key part of the
Hmm.
tipping point, right? Because if your
Right.
customer says, oh yeah, this is great,
Let's
absolutely,
keep
you're not
doing
going to
it.
want to do it
Then,
another way.
right. Then hopefully the contract changes, and all it starts to evolve into something that's a little easier to manage moving forward, and you take that learning and you reapply it.
Exactly.
So those are some of the that's one of the key benefits. Obviously, is value delivery, reduction of waste. Some of the other ones you mentioned in your case study include defect reduction and more client interaction. So let's talk for just a few moments about these benefits, these other benefits that came with this change.
Yeah, we have this slide from Scaled Agile that has these 4 quadrants, right? And it talks
Hmm.
about time to market. For these guys, time to market is not so critical, except they do know that there's this, with the waterfall method, there's this, how are we doing? Doing great, doing great, doing great. Now we're integration testing it, and we got a tail to,
Boom. Yeah.
right?
exactly. It's always been that way, right? For years.
Always, always. It's just a matter of how small we can make the tailspin, but it's just always been a given, right?
But
So
isn't it
time to
part of that
market.
the funding model, right? So it's like, we're doing great, give us more money. We're doing great, give us more money. We're doing great, give us more money. So that's part of the getting back to the whole contracting mechanism.
Right.
But
And then by the time you get to the integration testing and the tailspin, there's so much momentum and investing. You're
right.
what we would call in
Can't go
poker,
back.
pot committed, right?
Yeah, totally.
Right. So that's the model we're trying to get away from. But time to market, not so critical for these guys. Improved productivity, yes. But if you measure it in earned value, the challenge is that earned value assumes that your initial plan and its detail
are correct.
Was all-knowing from the beginning.
And everyone knows that's just a big farce.
Yes. But we didn't have any other way to manage, whether we're being productive or not. But now we do. We have other ways. And the key way is to keep our eye on the ball with business value and the assessment of business value based on the increments that we show you. Another of the 4 quadrants is happier, more motivated employees. And sometimes...
Yeah, that's another soft one. I'm wondering about that in these government programs, how...
I know.
Yeah, right.
Control. If you think about command and control, it's kind of like, okay, you have a
Just
job.
Be happy you have a job.
You have a job, you get a paycheck.
Right.
That should be all the happiness you need, right? And then
Not dropping, give me 10.
Right, exactly. But the 4th quadrant is the quality, reduction in defects. Right? And that's that tailspin. That's the one that is going to be most significant in these kind of environments, because you don't have the luxury of letting some defects go out into a military defense system. Their tolerance for defects is lower to almost zero.
Close to zero.
For any other environment, any other kind of environment that we work with. Right, so that's going to be the significant measurement of improvement.
So Cindy, we've talked about how programs can get started. There are a variety of ways. We talked about executive sponsorship. We talked about contracting. But it seems to me like there's a step even before that needs to take place. I mean, these executive sponsors have to believe or at least understand what these practices and processes are, what's involved, and how they can successfully work within their organizations and their constraints to make them happen. So there are a variety of briefings and trainings and things like that they can do or take in order to learn more. Can you explain what those are?
Sure. We have a lot of Scaled Agile framework offerings in terms of training, but there's also an executive briefing, which is a half to a full day workshop just to get people educated and motivated and in the foundation so that they can be the sponsors. So our most common path is to get those sponsors to educate the leadership. Then we pick a program, and we have some parameters around what makes the right program to pick. And sometimes people think, oh, well, you have to have Agile teams before you can create an Agile program, but that's not true. We do the transformation simultaneously. Often we do, and so we have some techniques for achieving that. But that's the most common pattern that we follow, is educate and find the leadership and then start determining the path forward and educating the people on the teams and programs.
I think the executive briefing is a real key one that I want to just emphasize. We've got a few. The one that we've delivered the most often is specific to aerospace and defense. So, and that's currently our biggest market in the systems side of the house, and it does lead into then program identification and then training the leaders within that particular program and things like that. I should
also mention Yeah, Brian, I should also mention there's a Safe for Government class that's being developed
Right.
by Scaled Agile Inc. But we also tailor, I'm always asked by my customers, could you throw in a discussion about earned value or
Right. Of
about Agile
course.
contracts? And
Or how
so,
you don't use earned value, right?
they don't have a choice to use earned value, but we
Oh, I
talk
see what you
about
mean.
how you can use a relative business value metric to complement and find the balance. So
Oh,
things
I
like
see.
that we
I
can
see.
add into any of the training
Right.
work that we do.
Well, so the Safe for Gov class is really, I mean, essentially it's available now. It is in beta, but people can sign up. It's a public class, and it'll go GA in a couple of months. There's also a Leading Safe class, which essentially is the same class, but in a more, I guess, traditionally more software centric kind of basis. And then we can do either of those classes on site if people would prefer to sort of keep it in-house instead of going and attending a public class. So I wanted to throw that out there. And then it's it's a number of months or more depending on how big the program is and how fast they want to go. So it's an investment of time and treasure to really make it happen. But with both the benefits that we've talked about today, and getting back to the DoD and the Pentagon saying that they're urging DoD and government programs to adopt Agile immediately. I think it's really it's time for people to take a serious look at this sooner rather than later. So.
Absolutely, and we're proud to say that we have the experience that's going to help people make it through the transformation in an enjoyable and successful way.
Yep, we've got the chops for sure. We've been doing it for a few years, and we've actually even for those viewers who don't know, we've helped Scaled Agile, the SAI team, to incorporate some of the systems engineering thinking into the framework. So we're real proud of that. So, well, Cindy, it's been a pleasure. Anything else you'd like to add?
No, thanks for the opportunity to share this with the folks out there, because it's a huge opportunity for all of us to improve how our government military systems are developed and delivered, and aren't we all invested in that?
Absolutely, absolutely. And for our viewers, links to some of the resources that we've been discussing are below. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel. And you're watching 321 Gangs Change the Conversation podcast. We'll catch you next time.